Okay, hopefully you watched a previous video on PowerShell testing domain accessibility to ensure that all your computers are accessible. The information here is to demonstrate some concerns between compliance and cybersecurity. Using PowerShell can present the information in a useful way for cybersecurity professionals. No matter the industry or regulatory requirements, you must consider compliance as only a baseline and understand your environment will you begin implementing cybersecurity. There'll be a lot of information presented here. I'm only going to touch on some of the key items so I can keep the video short. Your results will differ and suggest you review objectively and not just from a compliance perspective. If you were an adversary, how could you use this information to exploit? Then can you begin to implement effective mitigations? As in a previous video, you see I've got the folder, T GitHub Active Directory. You can see the previous one, the test domain, but we also have domain.ps1. And again, so that you can run it without modifying your execution policy permissions, here's the command line, PowerShell, TAC, execution policy, space, bypass, TAC, domain, file, TAC, domain. And we'll go ahead and get it running. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and minimize a few of these screens for a minute here. So you can see we ran the scripts against 4 computers. It took 6 minutes, 4 seconds. So not too bad. A lot of information. And again, you see all the different functions that it's running against. So, and there's a handful I didn't even run. Some of these do take a little bit longer and provide information. So I'd suggest, comment in and out what's useful to you and how you want to see it. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into some results. First thing I want to show you is here. Again, we see the file path that I put it in, and then in 13550. So if I jump out, you can see I've run it multiple times. And here is all of the files that this script created. The master is the one that we're going to immediately look at, but you can see for each of the workstations, it kind of created some additional, again, which you can comment in or out, what has value to you, what does not. So let's jump into the script. So first thing we pull is Active Directory computers. So this would be all the computers in your AD. You can see we have a Linux, which is Red Hat 7, has never logged in. So I'm going to look at this and be like, why? Or if the dates are, 15, 30 days out, why has it not logged in, re-authenticated to the domain? Is it rogue? Is it offline? Just what's the status? I think next thing you'll see is that it's in a container and not in OU. So, this could present problems depending on where you put your group policies. Same thing with workstation 2. Notice it's in computers and not in an OU. So Windows versions. Thing I look for is product consistency, release and current build, so I can see all of my versions are the same, so I feel pretty good there. If one of them was running 21H1 or 20H1, then, why is my baseline different? Why is it not updating like it should be? Can also use this information, to Google, am I on the most current? BIOS information. What I look at here, you can see these are virtuals, so it's using the tool set. So not much applicability to virtuals other than, the version release date, which I might look and see why these are different. But for physical boxes, I want to run service tag, get the make model, and I want to look at the BIOS date and the version, is this the most current? In this case, it happens to be because I did check it. PowerShell version, kind of same thing. Given the product release, like Windows 10 versus server, am I on the same build and revision across the board? Active Directory users present a lot of good information here. So we are looking at accounts that are enabled. Are they currently locked out? when was the last time their password was set. So I can see the age of that one is 20 days old, and this one is 58 days. I can also see the last logon for each of them. And if it's set to password never expires. So like in the case for the two bottom, I'd really want to correct those, and in fact guest should be disabled. I left it on for testing purposes. So again, a lot of good information here. What is your current password policy? Have these exceeded that password policy? Have I not logged on in an appropriate amount of days? Should the account be disabled, etc.? So again, just a lot of good information. Now, one thing I want to point out, the difference between the domain users and local users is password never expires. That feature is not set up for local accounts. But the way you can really tell is if the password is set to expire. So if this is set to a date, then you know that password never expires is false. Any of them that are blank are set to true. So you really need to look at these. You can see like in the account, in this case, this general user account, this happens to be an old laptop I just threw on for testing purposes. That one has not been updated and set since 2,139 days. So that one's pretty old. That account could be exploited real easy, and who would know? So that should really be either disabled because nobody's logged in, and or a password change. So you can see all of the other passwords are set, within a tolerable level, whatever your regulatory requirements are, whether it's 60 days, 90, 180. So again, presenting great information here for you to review. So now for Active Directory, who are the administrators? So now I can see by username and logins who are administrators throughout the entire domain, and we do the same for local accounts. So now I can kind of compare, all of my admin accounts versus local accounts, and are they set up correctly? Also pull domain user groups. What I like to look at here is by the username, what groups are they members of? So I can look and see administrator as a member of group policy creators, users, domain admins, enterprise admins, etc. So you can kind of scroll through. Guest is a member of guest, not even domain users. But again, we're going to disable that one. Jack, his account is enabled, and we can see he is also an administrator at the domain. So again, a lot of good information here for you to review and check. So get local groups. This right here enumerates all of the workstations, or all of the computers, and we can see workstation 1. Here's all of the groups that are part of the local machine. Typically in a domain environment, they would not be used. So I'm really looking for anomalies at this point. Is there anything different between this workstation and the ones below it? Oh, and the other thing, just because it presented itself, for local accounts, if you're using a domain, the question will be, who is logging in locally and why? So I can see these accounts here on the local machines have not been logged into in a number of days. So that's good. That means you're using the domain versus local account. Local account should only be used in emergency, situations in a domain. So get net accounts. This right here looks out for what is your current policy. Currently it's set to 60 days, minimum password length 14. Again, what is the local policy? My users above, are they within that tolerance? This is the tolerance you're looking for. Execution policy, we talked about PowerShell, and that's kind of why I do the execution policy bypass. We can see that the local machine for the domain controller is set to remote signed only. Workstation 1 and 2 are unrestricted, but 3 is undefined. It's kind of strange in a domain. Typically you would set everything through the GPO, so with this one being different, would modify my baseline. So this would be something I would look into. Very good one here, USB activity. So I've enumerated all of the local machines and what USB devices have been connected to it. So, whether Kangaroo flash drives, Corsair flash, etc. Do you allow USB media to be connected to your computers? If so, are they authorized? This produces a list. Then down below, we just pull a little bit of additional information showing each of them. Really where you can get some good meat and potatoes is right here in the plug-and-play devices. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into workstation, I think 2. Yep, and I'll tell you why. So workstation 2, we'll focus on that one here for a minute. So I notice, do you allow Bluetooth in your environment? These are devices that have actually connected to this device. Whether virtual or not, it's connected in some way, shape, or form. I can also see all of the disk drives that have connected. So here's all the portable media. I can also see under audio, speakers, microphone, right? I believe under image, somewhere in here should be a camera. So again, we're looking for the anomalies. What's authorized, what's not, and for plug and play, USB plug and play, this gives you a ton of information. I do have a Logitech camera, and obviously it's not connected here. But in here under imaging category, you would see camera. Now, what's real interesting is as we scroll down, again, you can see some USB devices, right? So Samsung Mobile USB. So I would question that in the environment, but I would also go back up here to modem, right? I can see a modem has connected. Samsung, USB modem. Was that a phone, tablet, device? Well, it didn't show up under storage, but if we look here under WPD, I see that a Galaxy Tab A is connected. So do we allow these devices to connect to our computers? A lot of good information here. Not just from compliance, but also, these devices could pass malware. They could be exfilling data. There's just a lot of information here. So you need to look at it for your environment. Do you allow Wi-Fi, right? So Pnp gives you a lot of good information. Now the Pnp Device Properties give you supporting information up here. So I want to jump into workstation 2 and I'm going to open Pnp Device Properties. And I'm going to do a quick search first. Well, first I can see Kangaroo, right? So if there's a device that sparks interest, I can see Kangaroo. I can see it was first connected on this date and time. I can see it was last connected this date and time, and it's currently not connected, right? So again, it gives you the ability to look and say, somebody connected the tablet on December 27th. Why? So these are things you want to look at for your environment. Okay, so Pnp devices, those are the big things. Audit policy. So what is your current audit policy set to? Are you going off, like in this case, STIG compliant, which we can see workstation 3. If I kind of scroll down, I'll tell you this is not STIG compliant just because I know some of the settings that are in here, right? So we'll jump down to the next machine, workstation 2. I can see my success failures, and there is more success failures in here. And the question is, what is security relevant to you and why? Removable storage. You're telling it to look for removable storage. But we're also, once we get looking at the events, we're going to dig on that one a little bit more. So workstation 2 is STIG compliant, and again, I know just by looking, but you would actually put these maybe in an Excel spreadsheet, something to be able to compare all of your settings for what's being audited and why. Ports and processes. So I do have two different functions that run for two different reasons. Here I can see all of the connections that are established. So based on this computer, I can see all of the ports that are currently established into what IP address. So there's value here when you're looking, connectivity, what is anything allowed to connect external? If so, what ports and why? Also within the same script, I look at just ports listening. There are a few deltas here compared to the portion below, but what I'm looking for is what ports are not authorized. So these are established connections listening. And if I jump down to get local ports, this looks at each machine and says what ports are listening. And again, I'm looking for what's not authorized. On the workstations, I'd be looking for, port 22, 23, 80, 443, etc. Or it may be even malicious ports. Some of these you might have to reach out and Google and say why. We know 3389 is RDP. Is it authorized? Great. We know from the previous video that 5985 is for your Windows remote access to allow these scripts to run. Great. And 135.445, we know that those are domain. So this machine, I'd be looking to see why 7680 is authorized or listening. Same with 8089. Some of these are local, loop back only, as in the case here, but this one's open to the entire subnet. So again, I'd be looking for some of the anomalies. 636, that's on the DC. Don't know it offhand, but I would Google it and find out why. So get TPM. So we know with Windows 11 and with BitLocker, TPM is required. So reach out and grab all of the TPM settings. Because it's server standard, it doesn't return TPM, and because the 1 and 2 are virtuals, it's not going to return a TPM. And in this case, the physical device, Workstation 3, does not have a TPM. It's returning all false. I'd have to look at this and either replace it to run Windows 11, or if I wanted BitLocker running, I would have to, look at the TPM settings. And in some cases, it might even just be your BIOS setting. So this is research you're going to have to do for your environment. SMB shares reaches out to each of the machines, looks for what shares are open for compliance. And when I say compliance, I'm talking about DoD compliance. Shares are not authorized on workstations or in the root of system drives. Well, in this case, because it's a virtual, yes, my shares are on same drive as my system drive, but I'm okay with it because it's a lab environment. The admin dollar, C dollar, and IPC dollar, these are all Windows default. Those are fine. So I would look what shares are outside of that and why. Get disk info. So again, being virtuals, the big thing I'm looking for is GPT for your partition style. You remember I mentioned Workstation 3 is a physical, and it's currently set to master boot record. So master boot record, you cannot do secure boot from your BIOS with master boot record. It has to be GPT. So you'd have to modify your partition table. And yeah, it's not easy. It is easy, but it's scary at the same time. A lot of horror stories on the internet about doing it. I was able to do mine successful. I'm not going into details. PS drives, just reaches out, returns your drives, format, use space, free space from an assessment. Not much value, but you might have value. It was a quick, easy one to put together. So get BitLocker. I'm going to jump right to, well, let's start with Workstation 3 because you're going to see a little bit of delta. Workstation 3 we know is not encrypted and no encryption method is returning. Workstation 2 is encrypted at 256. Now the funny thing is Workstation 1 is also encrypted, but it's not returning a method. It's my opinion, whether I run manage BDE or the PowerShell BitLocker, my results are similar. So I'm going to have to dig and see why it's not returning. I think it might be a bug in Windows, not 100% sure, but I know it's encrypted. But for you, and what I would look for as an assessor is that FIPS 140-2 being 256. If it's 128, which is Windows BitLocker by default, foul. Windows capability. So when you go in, add, remove features, that's pretty much what this information is coming from. And is what I've done is pulled what's installed. So Workstation 1, again, we kind of know this is my admin box. So I'm really looking for any software or anything that's installed that is not necessary. The more software we have installed, the more vulnerabilities or potential exploits we could have. You can also see I have installed the remote server access tools, which we talked about in a previous video. And when you install the AD domain services tool, it will by default also install the server manager. And again, from the previous video, I've installed the group policy on all of the machines. Because these are really bare bones machines, that's why the list of features here is very short. But anything I could disable, I probably will, or should as an IA professional. So optional features. As a domain controller, I won't go into details. Again, very canned, vanilla. I did not install anything additional here, but I would be looking for anything I could disable. I'll jump into Workstation 1 and kind of scroll through its list. And again, is there anything in Workstation 1 that I could uninstall? Very short list, so I'm in good shape. Get installed programs. So enumerate, again, all of the workstations, what's installed, why. So Workstation 1, I can see, what I have physically installed, and pretty clean. I do like Sublime Text Editor. We can see the VM tools and Update Health Tools. So we can see that those were installed. I can scroll down and look, and I'm actually going to jump into the master list. So right here is the master list, and it also exports into your folder. So if I go to the root, here's a master software list that you can use to review. This removes all duplicates. The value I have here as an example is I can see SCAP compliance checker. We know it's installed in 2 different machines, but I have 2 different versions. So I would go up and find out what machine this was installed on, the 5.4, and let's get it updated to 5.4.2. Other than that, my software same thing with VM tools. I do have 2 different versions installed. So I like to be consistent, make sure everything is the same across the board. This could be because of server versus workstation. I could always look up at the list and check. In fact, why not? Because we're here. VM tools 11.2, then if I come here 11.2.5, so I can see that these 2 are the same, and workstation 2 is different, the same as, and VM3 does not even have VM tools installed. So again, the information that you get, just 30 seconds of analysis gets you a lot. Startup programs. So these are all the programs that are part of the startup. For corporate, government, or even, just best practices, are these programs used? If they're not used in your environment, remove them. Again, I told you Workstation 3, so I would look at these 2. Of course, it was my wife's old laptop, had laying around, so pointing out some great stuff here. Immediately remove those. But again, to the point, this takes up resources and potential exploits and vulnerabilities. Same thing with scheduled tasks. Now, I want to jump right down to a workstation, but as I'm scrolling down, just look at the list of scheduled tasks that are part of server, and workstation 1, right? These are default. Look at everything that it puts in there. So again, what value do some of these have to your environment? If you were in a closed environment, do I really want OneDrive, especially reporting, right? Maps. Why do I need maps, especially in a corporate environment? Cellular. So if you haven't paired your cellular device to the workstation, why, right? So again, just resources and potential exploits and vulnerabilities. So again, not going into depth, so we're going to jump down. And now we look at Windows updates. So kind of what I look for, and just to shorten the report, I remove the Defender updates because there are so many, it's just made sense. And you'll be able to search for it in the script and see which KB it was. So I can see with Windows Server, each month, pretty consistent. Workstation 1. I can look at these dates. Actually, we'll jump to Workstation 2, just because that one happens to be about a year old. I can, kind of scroll down the list, see every month there is something, some activity, but really I can look at the failed ones and see that 20H2 failed. So if I had this script back then, I'd be able to really look and see why. I can see the number of failures that it did. We know from looking above at the version that everything is currently on 21H2. So the failed ones are kind of irrelevant now. But you can really look and just see what is the frequency the updates are happening. Did they succeed, abort, fail, and or are still in progress? Again, just great information being presented. Hot fixes. So if you want to know if a hot fix has been applied, here's your computers and the KBs. And you can also see that list 2 is longer than 1 or 3, again, just because of the age of the computer. Running services, similar to startup task, right? Do I need the service? If I don't need the service, shut it off. Every service that runs takes up precious resources and could potentially introduce exploits or vulnerabilities. These being vanilla, not a whole lot to get rid of. But I might even look at geolocation and turn it off across the board. So again, what services are running? There's also under stop services, you can add that in and see, what stopped. So this report, because it's an HTML format, if you're watching the script, you can see that right here, default domain policies, it returns all of the default domain policies. So it gives you the ability to kind of drill in and order the settings for each of them. I'm not going to do it again just for time, so I'm going to go ahead and close that one. So I'll jump to the next one. Setup policy, and this one does have a lot of value when you're especially performing analysis. One of the things I like to do is click on Show All and immediately come over to the winning GPO. So I can see for Workstation 3 that all of my results for these settings are coming from the GPO. I can see that my settings here come from the WinRM. Good. But as I scroll down, I can also see, didn't show up on this one. So let's jump to Workstation 2, and I'll show you why in a minute. So I can also see that there's a lot of policy derived from local group policy. But if my domain was set up properly, everything should be coming from a domain and not the local. Only because I imported the DISA GPOs is why these are local, and I haven't set up the full GPO. But this allows you to really see where your GPO is coming from. If all of my workstations were local group policy, then I stand a high chance of my baseline being modified. where each computer could have different settings based on the local policy versus the domain policy. So that's why I like to look at this. And same thing with, that's a domain controller. You can look, see where all of that is derived from. So I'm going to go ahead and close that one. But in the next section, we looked at workstation 3, and we can see that here, the applied is coming from the domain, WinRM, and default domain policy. But there's a problem with the local group, and that's why it wasn't reflective. The laptop is old, hadn't been updated, so there could be multiple reasons why. I'm not going to dig in this video into why, but if we look at like workstation 2, we can see all of the policies are being applied appropriately, which is different from workstation 3. So my baseline is different. I would probably take workstation 3 offline, more than likely re-image, update, do something, right? My domain controller, I can see it's applying the local, that's under user, so default domain group. So again, value in why. Here's the domain controller. So we can see domain policy plus domain controller policy is being applied. So for 3 of the 4 machines, it appears all the group policies are being applied properly. So again, you see, I'll just go back right here to the top of this section. The biggest difference and the quick looks, this will pull each and every setting and compare it to where the GP result just kind of gets you the baseline. You know, what policies are being applied where. Event log list. So when we talk about reviewing event logs, why, right? We're not going on site and review, you know, kind of what people are audited and why. The majority of the time, 99% of the time, it happens to be application security and system. Okay, got it. Because that's what compliance tells us, right? But if you drill in under applications, services logs, Microsoft Windows, you can see that there's a whole bunch of other events that are potentially being audited or auditable. The important thing is what is important to your environment. If you're running SQL Server, you would probably see some event logs in here for SQL. Same with Hyper-V, right? If this were a Hyper-V server, I'd probably have 10 or 12 different events in here, or event log types. Now, one reason I have print service expanded is if I right click and go to properties, I can see this is enabled. It was not enabled by default. So any job I print would show up in here, right? As part of compliance, you're supposed to review all print jobs. And this will capture whether print to device or print to like PDF, print to file. So as an auditor, if somebody were trying to exfil data, this would be, you know, one resource. Same thing like we were able to pull USB devices. But to really get more granular, this event here, driver frameworks user mode, this captures every time devices are connected. So again, another good resource to be able to look and see what devices are connected and explicitly when. That's where Event Viewer can get you a lot more detail than the plug and play or even the USB activity. So very minimal. But for you, each of you, each user, each environment, you need to look through here what has value, what should you be auditing, and more importantly, why. And that's what this report here kind of demonstrates. These are the ones that are on by default. So in Windows Domain Controller, you know, look at the number of events in directory services. There's not one policy out there or regulatory requirement that says, I will look at directory services, I will look at DNS services, I will look at key management. You need to look at it from a security perspective and say, what is important and why? Just as I showed you for the print services and the USB devices. So, I mean, look at this list. What is important and why? Maybe you want to see every time, you know, the kernel boots up explicitly. Notifications, push, again, look at the number of events. And I think, yeah. So there's a lot in here. And again, I'm not going to go through each and every one of them. You need to determine what's important and what is security relevant. That's what I look at, security relevance. As an example, if I go to the workstation, I might jump down to remote desktop services. I want to know every time somebody connects and who, right? You could have a policy that prohibits it. Well, how are you going to know if you're not reviewing the logs? Here's the print service one for this particular device. We can see that it's on. So again, what events are you looking at and why? What is important? So we'll jump down, next section. So these are other events that are present but are currently disabled. So just as you were looking at the ones that are on and why, you might look at some of these and enable them for a reason that fits your environment. So you can see there's a lot of them, that's for sure. Windows profile, I think the important thing to look for the firewall profile is the path. We were talking about Audit Team, and from up here, there is no Defender firewall logs. So you need to be able to look at this data and determine, what's being captured and why, what's being denied. Similar firewall rules. These are Windows default. I want to skip the server for a moment. And, I'm at the server, right? If I don't have email, why would I have these firewall exceptions? And this is just for what's authorized. If I jump down to a workstation, photos. What relevance do photos allowing out on your firewall have? 3D Builder. Again, there is a ton of them. Cortana, mailing Groove Music. Do you allow Groove Music in your environment? If not, I would disable these. Because again, the more ports you have open, the more receptive you are to exploits and vulnerabilities. News, pay, people, photos, solitaire, right? Get rid of this crap. Because I know I will. Remote assistance, paint. The list goes on. Disable what you can. Make notes of what you disable in case you break something. Okay, Xbox game bar. Really? No, disable that crap. Do you allow Wi-Fi? Especially Wi-Fi discovery. If not, get rid of it. So that kind of sums up some of the things, we look for: cybersecurity versus compliance, what's security relevant in your environment versus compliance, and adjust and keep rolling. Sorry the video was longer than I anticipated, but I believe there's a lot of good information here. And again, comment in or out what you want to see and run it regular. Give me any feedback, share, subscribe.